Vanakkam, Namaste, and blessings to everyone. This is Dr. Bhairavi Balasubramanian, PhD, the Sky Priestess. And there are birds chirping. I feel like Snow White. Okay. So, as I work, Spirit basically said, go do this. So I did. Today we're going to be having a very, very important discussion on the kinds of energies that all of us are going to be asked to investigate and become aware of in the week ahead. There is a lot happening astrologically speaking. I would rather talk about the energy behind all of this as opposed to saying this aspect does that and that aspect does this. I'd rather just get into it. So, what we're going to be seeing now is a very powerful theme on the focus of facilitation. Now, when I was starting out in this incarnation as the Sky Priestess, it was a very different field just a few years ago. And obviously, I've been doing this for a long time in other lifetimes and whatnot. But I've noticed that people are becoming a lot more aware of facilitation, but it is also creating a large ego. The ego that surrounds facilitation is one that has been around ever since facilitators have been present on this earth, but the way it's marketed and commercialized tends to bring out that facilitator's ego a lot more. And by that, I'm not talking about even necessarily being egotistical, but rather an idea where you see spirit through the lenses of ego as opposed to a more direct connection. And that doesn't work. The moment you try to compartmentalize your relationship with spirit in any way, whether it's, doing something, compromising something somewhere, forcing yourself into a box to make yourself more approachable, more marketable, you already are taking one step away from that direct experience. Not all facilitators do this. And then again, not all of them are the equivalent of the wild woman archetype living in a cave somewhere surrounded by bears. So, there are shades of negotiation that are possible there, but that also depends on just how central your practice is to your life. And which brings me to another question. I think all of us are being pushed into a level of self sufficiency and an idea that we need to be taking care of ourselves. That does not mean that we shouldn't help other people where it's possible and appropriate, but it does mean that we should be focusing on nurturing ourselves, managing our own energy, and being aware of what that energy is in the first place. Just because you can do something, just because you have a gift at something, it doesn't matter whether it's from this life or another lives, you still need to understand what is the karma around it. What contracts does that implicate you in? What are the energies working with you? A lot of people romanticize ancestors. They romanticize ETs. They romanticize things that are out there, above or below, claiming that that is what's coming into channel. And some of these things are good, but a lot of them are already fucked up to begin with. Otherwise, we would not be in this situation. I know people want to believe that there's going to be something coming from up there helping us now, but if it was going to come, it should have already come a while back. Right now, the people who are making the biggest changes in the world are human beings. Human beings actually acting with their consciousness and their ability to make change happen. Not by, calling out to some other thing. Now, it doesn't mean that I think they don't exist. Of course they do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to overextend your energy into something that is bigger than you. That's a very Piscean thing. When we overextend ourselves in the name of facilitation, we need to get the energy from somewhere else. And that's when you make contracts. That's when you actually open back doors, not only in your field, but also in the field of whoever you're working with, which is one of the reasons why I take a very strong stance on this. If you are unable to actually do something with, not to say with your own personal life force, there is a part of facilitation where you step back and let spirit work. But that is a self, that requires a sense of self that is already integrated to begin with. Without that, you're opening yourself up and whoever you work with to a lot of karmic shenanigans. And I have unfortunately witnessed in my own case too many facilitators who did not think about this. Because I grew up in an Indian background, I was already aware of of the influence of, ancestors and whatnot. It was not a religious household, but I could feel it and I could believe and know that this is not the way it's being romanticized. But people who are coming into this without any prior experience of their own are taking these concepts at face value and the way they've been commoditized and the way that they are selling a new spiritual lifestyle. It's not something that actually helps. So remember that facilitation isn't just about you having a skill set. It's also about you having an awareness of what you bring to the table and what other hidden forces or things are trying to push you in certain directions. And that's what a lot of facilitators get when they come to me in a session. I go, "Did you know you're working with X, Y, and Z?" And they'll be like, "Oh my God, that makes sense. How do I clear it?" And then we talk about the next step, which doesn't mean that people shouldn't do it. It just means to say that you have to have that expanded awareness about you. And the reason why I'm bringing this up right now is that the next week has too many opportunities for well meaning people who just want to go in and help to mess up their own karma and somebody else's karma. Because people don't think about it. Like when I'm doing a session, I'm using myself as a model because I can only actually speak for myself. I'm not saying other people don't. But when I do a session, I have to actually do a lot of energetic anchoring work before and after. It ain't just the talk. And I can guarantee you most people don't do that. Saying, let this happen for the highest good, it might have been enough a couple of years back, but right now you have got to layer that statement with a lot of energy. And that's not something that's being talked about because if you make facilitation seem too difficult, you can't sell it. So, this is the kind of energy which I encourage all facilitators to think about, especially in the next week. Why do you do what you do? How do you do it? How do you keep energetic safeguards for yourself, your family, and for the client and their loved ones? Are you able to hold that field and space? And if you're not wanting to think about this or you're not aware of this, should this actually be something that you're doing right now? And I know there are going to be people who hate the fact that I'm raising this, and this is exactly why it needs to be said. This is not a game. Whether it's drawing cards for someone, whether it's doing, some kind of a shamanic retrieval for someone, whether it's doing something that creates an energetic shift, you need to think through the consequences of your actions. Because if more people stop to think, this would actually be this industry would be a lot cleaner than it is. We won't be seeing facilitators who are broken by years of service or people who just come out of it just feeling really burnt. Now, there are, of course, those who are already working with really good guides and really good teams. Keep doing what you're doing. You're setting a good example in the world. That's good. But for the people coming in, I want them to think about this. Because if you don't, the consequences, you might not see it in this life, but you're definitely going to see it at a later point. I mean, I have unfortunately had the first-hand experience of seeing people who, people I know who really have no business doing anything of this. They might suddenly start using objects and doing spells and this shit and that shit. And then the consequences to their families is horrific. But of course, they're not going to stop because they think they know what they're doing. Hence the facilitator ego. That particular egoic state gives you a belief in your own self-mastery that is unhealthy. I'm doing this because Spirit said so. Now, yes, I know I use the same language, but what you also don't know is the amount of time that goes behind thinking through and sitting with every statement that I make. So that is something behind the scenes that everyone should be doing as part of their practice. There are very few times where I get preachy, and this is one of those times, just because I've seen the people come to me and I've seen people in my own life who have just not listened. If you're doing anything, it doesn't matter if you think you're doing, I'm just going to do this little spell here in this corner. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. The one time I actually cast a spell, it was by accident. I mean, really, it was completely by accident. I was sitting in a field somewhere in England, feeling sad for myself, and I was just speaking out loud. And that's when I realized I could do magic, but that's why I don't do it. So there was this spell, and I was just thinking about all the qualities of a guy I wanted to manifest. And it wasn't even that conscious, and I was just feeling sad and thinking out loud. And all of a sudden, a guy sees me at the train station. I think a couple of weeks later. The university had chosen to use my face as its representative without consulting me or asking me. And this guy suddenly sees me, and he goes, "You're Miss Warwick." I'm like, "What? Excuse me?" And she's like, "No, your face is on this poster." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And things lead to a thing, and so on and so forth. Things lead to a thing. How mysterious is that? But he basically, he just can't do anything except talk to me. And he goes to me and he says, "Yeah, but I just don't feel like myself when I'm talking to you. It's like I'm not in control." And then I remember me sitting in that field a couple of weeks prior going, "Oh shit." And so I speak to spirit again, said, "No, no, 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 undo it, undo it. This is not right. I didn't even mean to." And the moment I did that, he snapped out of it. And then that's when I realized I could do magic, and I needed to be super careful as to when and how I did it, because the consequences were not something that I could control. And I know, yes, there are many spiritual traditions that say you can do this, but those spiritual traditions, if you look deep enough, will also tell you about being careful, setting the right parameters for whatever work that you're doing. And the way the internet dilutes information right now, it doesn't tell you that shit. So yeah, that's a funny anecdote. Just but if I was a one of those controlling type of people, I'd have been like, "Hello, be my slave." But no, I was horrified. But that's when I realized I could do it. It just was the most natural thing in the world for me to do at that moment. I didn't use any tools. I didn't use any spells. I didn't like do anything fancy. I just sat with focused intention and emotion, not even intention. And something came, but it wasn't right. So that's one of the reasons why I take a very strong view on this. It's a very, very strong view on this. It's a kind of energy that a lot of people would not talk about because it put them out of business. And frankly, I mean, you got to look at it with all of these new age people, old age people, whatever people doing spiritual shit all over the world. And if everyone was as effective as they said, we would all be in a very, very different world. At the end of the day, no matter what the marketing hype is, you got to look at the result. And frankly, the world, yes, yes, we are saying things are changing, things are going to get better. That is the hope. And I hope they will. And that isn't because of any whatever work other people are doing. It's honestly because of the next generation coming in. That's where I have my hope. And, I think the best we can do is to not mess it up for them, thinking that we're playing around with magic. I mean, and this is one of the reasons why, again, I take a very, very strong stance onto what New Age communities go and do on indigenous land. As you've seen on my YouTube, I was recently listening live to this law seminar where people are talking about how indigenous people in Australia were not represented and did not even have an acknowledgement from their government that they, should have their particular rights and through their particular energies and through their particular lands. I mean, yes, there's some rights given, but they're still institutionally disempowered. So naturally, I raise this question. And when I receive a response from them, I will let you know what they say. But that is, these are the energies that we need to think about right now. And I see that a lot of questions have come up around this. Before I move on to another point, first of all, hello to everyone. Before I move to another point, I'm just going to answer some of the questions here. If we cast a spell for ourselves, not others, isn't that okay? Frankly, I would ask you, why do you want to? Will working magic and spells are powerful. They have effects and consequences. You can live your life that way, but why? I mean, if you were thirsty, if you were hungry, would you cast a spell or would you just go and eat or drink? At the end of the day, what I have found is the most powerful way of manifestation is to allow it to happen and trust in spirit's timing. Very rarely does a person actually need the kind of facilitation and the kind of spell making that is so rampant on the internet. In a very, in a fraction of cases, in a minor, minor, minor instance of cases. So if you want to cast a spell for yourself, you can, but you also need to put things in the framework, in the structure of that spell that says, I want this to happen in this way. You can't just say, give him money. What if someone you love dies and you inherit something? How are you going to feel about that? So you can, but you have to be careful about it. So hopefully that answers one of the questions. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see. If you impose on another's free will, then there is a consequence, right? It's a universal law. Absolutely. Thankfully, in my case, we caught it in time. I had no idea it was even happening because this was quite early on in the journey of this lifetime. Of course, there's a consequence, and I was just like, no. Now, Grace asked, Dr. B, what if people are casting spells at you without your consent? That is one of those cases where, at times, it is a case of just powering through it through will. Most of the time, this is okay because very rarely do you get, someone who's spending every single day making dolls of you and putting shit in those dolls and whatnot. Very rarely do you find a case like that. And in those cases, you do need counter magic. You do need counter protection because it would be a lie to say that this was useless. It's not. What I'm saying is it should only be used in an extreme situation or case. Grace says there are universal laws. Intention manifests magic. We do it all the time and to ourselves. That is true and not true at the same time. When we're talking about magic as a separate category of experience, it's something that we're doing that is out of the normal. And unfortunately, one of the New Age misnomers is to dilute the meaning of terms so much to the point where anyone can say anything and it sounds good. Like if you're saying, okay, I'm going to go and focus on this today, yes, that's magic. But that's very, very different from you sitting in a space for 1 to 2 hours and saying, I'm going to manifest abundance. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. That's very, very different. Unfortunately, New Age books have made it easy to do magic, but without people understanding the consequences of it. And unfortunately, the term magic has been diluted. So when someone says, I'm full of magic today, they're not actually thinking about what the term originally meant. There's always going to be a cause and effect. But when you are doing something that is outside the normal flow of your energy, this is when it really needs to be, considered. Let's see. Karina asked, so when you say magic, it's just manifestation. See, this is exactly why this discussion is needed. New Age concepts have completely diluted the meaning of the words. No, it's not just manifestation. Magic takes an intention. Magic takes a will, or even a very, very strong emotion. It usually involves some kind of tool, some kind of structure, and some kind of form. You can also equate it to ritual, though sometimes for some people, just having a very, very strong and focused emotion is enough to manifest. Remember that psychic abilities does not necessarily mean having grace or having good karma. It just means you have the ability to influence reality in ways that are not so great. Vivi says, hello, Dr. Bhairavi. Hello, Vivi. Grace says, there's a lot of colonizer religions and folk spells that don't acknowledge and that we are on. Yeah, the way the US is right now is a pretty good example of what happens when you do that. Lumi says, I'm worried about young people misusing spiritual powers. Apparently, there is a new trend among teens on TikTok called shifting, where they enter alternate dimensions and get addicted to it. Oh, for fuck's sake. Yes, this is exactly why this discussion is so important. The media also has a big role to play in this. It's not to say that people shouldn't explore these areas. It is to say that they really need to do the due diligence and the basic research. Okay, Grace says, how do you seek permission to work right on people's land when protocols are lost? Frankly, I would say don't. That's it's whoop, I can hear the silence in the room. Don't. If you don't have permission to work on that land, don't do it. A lot of people have been trying to land work the United States. What's happening right now? Look at the results. Kavya says, it has indeed been an intense month. I have stepped my foot on my native land, which is, she's talking about India, where my second last generation of ancestors grew up after 14 years. That's a big deal. I hope you navigate safely. Jillian says, I have such mixed feelings about this because spell casting is a big part of conjure magic, and I'm trying to tap into that ancestral magic. Any advice on how to navigate? Again, I take a very strong view of this. If you're going into a new age, go into a new age. If you're still trying to hold on to aspects of the past, that's up to you, but you're going to have to find a way to navigate it yourself. Conjuration is not a bad thing, but we also forget that things that came from the past also faded out, whether it was through colonialism, whether it was through hubris, whether it was through geological changes, they did fade out. So trying to bring back an old way in exactly the way it was before is not going to work in the here and now. Perhaps there are elements of that, in conjunction with a practitioner who's kind of got their feet in both worlds, there are elements from that you could bring into the here and now, but that will take research. That'll take research, that'll take experimentation, that'll take practice. But that's the thing, you need to find someone in your tradition who was doing, both sides, so to speak. Um, let's see. Do, 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 do. Hang on. Okay, what else can I answer here? Watchman says, who's a dear friend, yes, there are karmic repercussions for spells, magic intentionally used for personal gain or directed at another and not for the greater good. There is no spell greater than the heart. Absolutely. You don't actually need anything beyond that. For curiosity, ask, what advice would you give to someone who feels that they are bound by a spell? Go to a practitioner who is not going to try and hook you in the guise of fear to try and find a way to undo it. Lady Luck says, we need to mind our karma as you shared, and when we go to other people and their lineages and practices, we perpetuate the unsavory things that we refuse to deal with from our own lineages. Agreed. Elijah says, magic is like any other art. You have to train, build technique, and teach us protocols. Exactly. The way it's talked about is just not doing any of those things. Limitless being, I find that simply being in awareness of what is happening is the magic. You're talking about something else, but being in awareness is not the same as trying to control someone else's fate, destiny, or the elements. So that's, yeah. S-Flower says what, but I don't know what that refers to. Okay. Karina says something about past magic, which is for the fifth dimensions, that people are just getting stuck there. The power is from within your own divine nature. I would generally agree with that. I would also say it's very important not to romanticize the higher dimensions as well, because there's also fuckery happening there too. It's just not in the same as what we are actually talking about as lower dimensional frequencies. In fact, the higher lower dichotomy is also a pretty weird one to begin with. But again, not everyone's going to agree with this because it's going to challenge their sense of self. It's going to challenge their sense of tradition. But you know what? That's why it needs to be said. That's why it needs to be said. That's why it needs to be asked. I work with a lot of people from African American and African descent. And I find that, a lot of them who are drawn to work with me at the very least ask the same question. This feels good. I know I'm honoring my past, but something about it is not really resonating with the way I want things to unfold in the now. It doesn't feel right. And I can't answer that question because I'm not in that tradition. This is not, something that I have the right to say, you do this and you do that. All I can say is find practitioners who, again, have that view. What is from the past that still is worth dealing with, and what is from the present that needs to be carried into the future. Do not take everything with rose-tinted glasses, whether it's the past or whether it's the future. So let's see, what is your view of psychedelic medicines done under expert supervision for improving some mental conditions like depression? That can work, but again, as with any type of facilitation, the expert needs to really be an expert. They need to have experience to know what happened. Is this a case of, biochemical imbalance? Is this the case of an ancestral influence? Is this the case of a fragmented spirit? Is this something that actually needs a shamanistic approach first? They need to be able to answer that because, someone who is an expert in doing this from the Western medical system will have absolutely no knowledge of the other stuff. So you got to question, where does that expertise come from? And is it a lived experience, or is it something because someone did a course somewhere? You got to ask all of these questions just because it is, again, very, very volatile at this time. I mean, one of the reasons why when Spirit said, cancel every session between the 25th to the 31st, I was like, what? Shit, why? Because it's uncomfortable. It's like, the Capricorn in me is just like, but no, we said, and then I was like, you know what? No, you're right. I notice people whom I would consider to be fairly strong in their energy, fairly grounded, fairly able to navigate. I notice people like that really, really struggling. And I wasn't even saying anything. I was just like, okay, tell me what you think about this. And all of their shit came up too quickly and at once. All of that stuff just came too quickly and at once. And thankfully, because I was dealing with someone who's already fairly well put together, I just kind of went, okay, no, let's take this down. Okay, one step, one step, one step, and we could find a way to navigate out of it. Someone who's not grounded and someone who doesn't have the experience to know bad shit when it comes up is not going to be able to handle the situation. There's a lot of energetic. I don't want to use the word portals because people get excited by it, but portals. There are many, many, many potentials and portals of energy opening up in unexpected spaces over the next week. And that's why it's better, I would say, to not mess about with your karma or someone else's, especially when you know the energies are volatile. See, and this is where the ego mind comes in. The ego mind has this belief that it has the idea to control. And Ben Jarvis has just asked the exact thing in a different way. Would you say humility is the key? Absolutely. The ego mind wants to control. It wants to believe that it can manipulate reality, it can manipulate fate, and it can get away with it, which is why Atlantis fell. Which is why we see that theme of pride and hubris again and again and again. And we see very, very powerful people falling from the pedestal. Humility is the only way to go. And humility doesn't mean that, you have to have that false humility going, I don't know anything. No, it is a case of, you know what you know there's a lot that you don't know, and you know that there's even more about what you don't know that you could ever realize. And you listen to what is being said. Listen, listen, listen to what is being said. Christabel says it's very difficult up here, many close folks, it's critical, extreme conditions, and the entire area is drenched in anxiety. That is exactly why self care, observation, and taking a distance would actually help at this time. Sometimes the best thing you can do as a facilitator is to step back and to say, if I touch this, it's going to make things accelerate too quickly, or maybe this is not my job, or maybe this is not my right to facilitate, especially when you're trying to facilitate land. Look at whether or not it's actually your role to do this. Because ego mind will just be like, well, I can do it. I can show you what I can do. And that doesn't help. It really doesn't help. As for the TikTok thing, oh my God, that is so terrible. I am, not at all happy to hear it. There are some young people that are very in tune. There are some that are not. That's the same for any age category and any age group. If you know a young person who's doing that, please try to explain to them why that is not a very safe thing to do. It doesn't matter what you're working with. If something tells you to get yourself out of your being and out of your essence for something else to come in, it ain't safe. At least, especially, I should say, especially in the now. So that's what I wanted to tell you. There's a lot to think about. Like I said, there's traditions that work with old ideas of magic, and they need to, um, I think that there's a lot of old ideas of magic, and they need to be revisited in the current age, which is not dilution, which is not making words mean something that they're not. It is looking at what are the energetic structures and safety protocols, in the now. Karina says, I see facilitation more as holding space and supporting someone to go where they're afraid to go alone. That is one kind of facilitation. Other facilitations are more direct. Sometimes the act of holding space itself can be a very powerful catalyst. Even the act of holding space is in itself a catalyst. It's not nothing. Even then, I would suggest that you don't hold space for the next week unless someone is in a very critical life or death situation. It's not just, there's no just about it. It's a powerful, energetic interaction in and of itself. And the way people have diluted the concept means that they don't know what its actual behind the scenes energetic ripples are. Gillian Guile says, would spiritual baths and working with root plants still count as the type of magic your advice against? No, that's fine. As long as you can actually, these are things that come from the earth in the sense that the substances come from the earth. What I would say is before you buy anything, whether it is a crystal, whether it's an oil, whether it's making a spiritual bath, whether it's, okay, the art of belly dance says human beings are naturally magical. It's our divine nature. Please go back to the beginning of this video before you comment. There's too much dilution in the terms. I'm not going to go through it again right now. Jillian Giles, in response to your question, yes, those are okay because they come from the earth. And what I would say with respect to this, ask the earth and feel into it. Like if I'm buying a crystal, I'm not just going to go, well, I like this piece of rose quartz. I'm going to go get it now. I want it. It's going to do this for me. No, you got to work with every crystal you talk to. Every crystal you talk to, every one of them has a consciousness. Let me give you an example. I was thinking about getting into making arts and crafts with epoxy resin, that plastic thing that hardens. So I ordered some gemstones, small gravelly pieces of gemstones. And part of me was like, nah, this is not the right thing. I was like, nah, I'm going to do it. And then, nah, it's not the right thing. So I was like, okay. So I ordered it and then I touched it and I could feel every single stone as alive. I was like, how would you feel if you as a alive being, as an alive consciousness was cast into something and forced to stay there forever? I was like, no, that's not going to work. So, it's like every single little thing that comes from the earth has its awareness. Everything. So if you're willing to do that level of due diligence into whatever you want to do with roots, herbs, and baths, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a spiritual bath is essentially something which is a compilation of herbs, salt, oils, other substances for healing and purification. If you're willing to put that level of intense focus on each, not only will you have a greater, experience, a more intense experience, but also one that that really respects the energy. So yes, you can work with it, but you gotta do a lot more due diligence behind it. Don't just buy it off a shelf because someone has put 200 together. That ain't respectful. But yeah, I would say that's about it. In response to the questions of the dates, these are most intense: 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30. Honestly, the most important dates I'd say is 25th, 26th, and the 31st. Um, uh, Elijah says crystals and herbs are let spirits. What is a let spirit? I'm not familiar with the term. Please feel free to educate me on that if I don't know. Or maybe it's just a typo, but let me know. Legit spirits. Okay, that makes more sense. Yes, they are absolutely legitimate spirits. But yeah, unless anyone has any questions, this is what I felt guided to share. Think about this, think it through. If you don't like me at the end of this video, that's fine. If you like me even more, that's also okay. But now you know and you can't unknow. Anyway, that's about it. Take care. Very many blessings. Lots of love. Treat everything with respect, including what you do in the name of facilitation and service. And may that all bring all of us into a greater, healthier collective experience. That's about it. Ciao, ciao for now. Peace out. Bye-bye.